the biggest choice, the most important choice I made when it came to disentangling myself, and I don't even know if I'm disentangled. There was a time about 8 years ago where I thought I was disentangled, and I'm listening to John Attack talk about something on a podcast, and he starts calling this thing the SP Doctrine. And I was like, well, no, I mean, everything, it's all bullshit, but that's real. And then he kept calling it a doctrine. And it's so funny because I have a degree from one of the best schools in the world where we study constructs and we rip apart constructs. After I left, I would read books like 1984 and I would be like, thank God I was never had thought control while I was under it. Okay. I would see a movie, you know, that happened all the time where I was in a authoritarian a thought control group, and I would scoff at people or art or movies or books that I would read where people where somebody was existing in it. I mean, that's how crazy and dark it is. But the language. So when I listened to John Attack and I went, oh my God, that SP thing is not real. It's a false construct. Like my job was to rip apart constructs as a writer, and I still would for many years believed those constructs. And when they're
what was John referring to when he says the SP construct? What is he even talking about?
He's basically saying the idea of an SP is a made up thing. It's just a made up. It's a construct. Some constructs are true and are based on data. Some constructs are just made up and are harmful and hurtful. And in that moment, I realized that SPs were fake, and the room started spinning. It was one of the last moments of entanglement.
So let me ask you this though, because one of the ways Scientologists are fed the SP doctrine is by using examples such as Hitler. So how are the Hitlers of the world either consistent or inconsistent with what we're calling the SP doctrine? I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I think Hitler had an overactive sympathetic nervous system. He was a malignant narcissist, which I believe, like one of the things the only thing that you cannot cure with a dual sympathetic reset, I'm convinced we don't know yet. But I do not think malignant narcissists in the NPD, the APA, DSM sense of the word, I believe that's biological damage to the brain. And I do not think a dual sympathetic reset will fix it. Okay. So you have somebody like Hitler who was a malignant narcissist. So he probably had brain damage and he had an overactive sympathetic nervous system. I can tell you a lot of things about his childhood. He grew up in a middle-class home. He had a very, very oppressive father. All Hitler wanted to do was be a painter. He failed art school twice. He failed to get into art academy twice. And so he was a guy who was never allowed to live. He was living through his father, and I don't think he liked it. But I think Hitler was a malignant narcissist, which means he had damage to his brain. And I think he had an overactive sympathetic nervous system. And that the combination of those two are dangerous. When you look at somebody like Aaron Hernandez or O.J. Simpson, what do those guys have in common? They have a thing called CTE, which is brain degradation from repeated concussions. That's all been documented. Okay. That reduces your executive function. It massively reduces the blood flow to your frontal cortex. Okay. So when you have somebody with an overactive sympathetic nervous system and their brain tells them that even the most mild things are a threat constantly, sound like anyone you know? And then you have your brain is degraded from CTE. So you have your executive function can't mitigate against that lie. That's when you get a Hitler or an OJ or somebody that does these horrific events.
Something just occurred to me. So even when I was in Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard never uses the terms a technical SP versus an administrative SP. But I had sort of come to this conclusion on my own that based on what L. Ron Hubbard said was the technical explanation for how an SP is created, that in my mind, as a Scientologist, in my mind, I said, okay, so there's real SPs who are created the technical way. And then there's administrative SPs who just didn't follow the rules. And so we called them an SP. Well, now, no, let me finish. Okay. Now, based on what L. Ron Hubbard said, the technical explanation based on Scientology belief on how an SP is created, it's actually quite similar to what you're saying about the sympathetic nervous system being overwhelmed, except he gives a past life description of it. And so just let me know if you've heard this, okay? So he goes, Here's how an SP is created. And there's some long ago incident where this being was almost completely overwhelmed. You can't kill a being, but as close to killing a being as you can, completely overwhelmed. And so it's a massive moment of pain and unconsciousness. And he was almost completely destroyed as a being. And this incident was so heavy and meaningful for him that he's never actually moved on from that incident. He's still stuck in that incident. It could be millions, billions, trillions of years ago. But he might look like he's in present time, but really his attention is stuck on this incident, and he equates everything and everyone in his present time environment with the sources of the overwhelm in the past. And so he sees everyone in his present time environment as a threat to his very survival and existence. And that's why he is either overtly or covertly trying to destroy anyone in his environment or fight against anything that would improve the ability or awareness of anyone in his environment. And that's technically what makes SPs SPs. Does that sound familiar?
It does. And I could 100% say, like, if you look at these kids that are all, you've gotten so many of these kids to speak out, they have overactive sympathetics and they're pissed off. You know, the Aftermath Foundation is kind of doing what the church could easily do, or the organization could easily do, right? Like, we all know these kids were harmed. Okay. They stopped having babies because kids were getting pissed off and angry. Or, you know, the lie is, oh, you know, parents were distracted, right? It's not why. The kids were, quote, flapping and creating massive problems. So we know that this existed. All this organization would have to do is what the president of Australia did a decade or so ago, which is make a public apology, as this guy did the Aborigines, and create funds for improvement. When I say reparations, like, I don't believe in reparations in the technical sense of like writing a check, but all that they would need to do is make a public apology to the children, stop the practices, create an educational fund with $5 million in it that they constantly replenish, and allow kids to apply for this money for any kind of education they want, beauty school to college, with a public apology. They would save that $5 million would be saved in attorney's fees in 2 years. Okay. So you guys are actually doing some of the repair work that they could easily do to fix it. And then this goes to the language thing. It's not about fixing it. It's about, we got to fucking hurt them. If you want to make a save the world omelet, you're going to have to crack a few skulls. And because that's the mentality, they'll never look at just the soft, easy handling that you guys are actually kind of doing by helping people. Okay. Right. Back to the language. So yes, if somebody has an overactive sympathetic, they're seeing a threat everywhere. They're overreacting and treating somebody that's benevolent as a threat. That would be a characteristic of a suppressive. But that's a fake doctrine. There's no such thing as a suppressive. You add brain damage, right? If you look at a brain scan and you look at somebody that's had a lot of TBI in a car accident, you're going to have also decreased blood flow to the frontal cortex. If you look at somebody, if you go to a prison where most people 99% of the people self-identify as having drug and alcohol problems, you're going to see brain toxicity. What are you going to see? Decreased blood flow to the frontal cortex, just like a TBI. They call it brain toxicity. So imagine if you're poor, you're growing up with an overactive sympathetic nervous system, and if you've used drugs and alcohol as a salve, or you've taken a hit to the head, your executive function is compromised. So that is an SP. But the SP doctrine of like there's just evil people out there and 2.5%, it's, you know, bananas. It doesn't exist. And I had to, when I was realizing this, as I was listening to John talking, literally the room started to move around me. I had to sit down.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe